looking back at it, the PlayStation 3 era was such a special time in gaming. This was at a time when gaming really started to become a little bit more connected. Online gaming really started to take off during this era, and that was special in its own right. But looking back at it, one of the things that stands out to me today is that AAA publishers were at their most creative. To this day, some of the most beloved and well-established franchises really came from this specific generation. It was such a building block to combine AAA games with this insane amount of creativity. And Sony was at the forefront of that development. See, Xbox was very competitive during this generation with the Xbox 360, and the PS3 didn't have that dominant lead like they usually do. Even now, a lot of people remembers the PlayStation 3 for that $600 launch price tag. They were known as arrogant Sony during that early generation, but that pushed them to the brink. They had to fight back from behind for much of its life cycle, and I think that weakness made for something truly special. See, it's not just about how you start, but it's also about how you finish. And Sony buckled down with the PlayStation 3, and they put out some of their most creative and best work ever. So you know what? Let's go down memory lane today and explore the 25 best PlayStation 3 games, many of which I still would highly recommend playing to this day. Now, I will say for this list, I decided to prioritize exclusive titles because, I think that's what made the PlayStation 3 so great. So with that said, let's just go and jump right into the list. Number 25, and to start things off, Heavenly Sword. It's so strange to go back and see what journeys certain studios take. And before Xbox acquired Ninja Theory, they were actually closely tied to the PlayStation brand. Heavenly Sword is one such exclusive that they produced together. Sony was in fact the publisher, and Heavenly Sword was one of their first PlayStation 3 exclusives. It's a wild hack and slash type of game, and as you would expect from Ninja Theory, its combat is fun, it's fast, and it's fluid. It's also aged fairly well, which again I think kind of shows Ninja Theory's graphical expertise even back on the PlayStation 3. 24. Twisted Metal. One thing that was really special about this generation was the emergence of online gaming, and this brought in all kinds of new possibilities. The very idea that Twisted Metal, one of the most fun multiplayer experiences on the PlayStation 1, could suddenly be revived with HD visuals and this more connected online experience sounded like the perfect combination on paper. Now, maybe the execution could have been a little bit better, and the single player could have been more expanded, but the core gameplay is still there. Those insane, over-the-top car battles are chaotic fun, and because it does have a single-player campaign as well, you can still go back and play Twisted Metal on a PlayStation 3. 23. MotorStorm. So this was actually at a time when Sony had other racing games besides just Gran Turismo, and really the MotorStorm series remains as one of the most fun racing games just period. Their blend of just destruction and creative tracks with a variety of vehicles is nothing short of a blast to play. If you want to use a motorcycle, it's got it. If you like big trucks, well, it's got that too. And it just has a certain chaos to its gameplay. The destruction and set pieces just adds this whole extra layer to its overall level design. These were really just fun racing games, and they just hold up all these years later. They're still a lot of fun, and you know what? I'm just going to go and throw this out there. If Sony ever wanted their own Forza Horizon, I don't know, maybe they could do something with the MotorStorm series. I'm just going to go ahead and plant that seed here. 22. PlayStation All-Stars. Pretty much since the inception of Super Smash Bros., there's always been that dream that PlayStation would make their own crossover fighter with their own plethora of IP. And, well, they finally did that during the PlayStation 3 era. Once again, and you've probably noticed the theme by this point, that creativity was at the forefront for PlayStation. And this finally resulted in us being able to face Kratos off against the likes of somebody like Jak and Daxter, Sackboy, or even Parappa the Rappa. They do have some of the most beloved characters of all time, so this just felt right at home. The only thing about this game, though, is that the gameplay was a lot different than what a lot of people were maybe expecting. It wasn't simply just a Smash Brothers clone. It really tried to do its own thing, which I think kind of made it polarizing. But looking back at it, it was still a lot of fun, and it's kind of sad to think that they've yet to try a sequel because there's certainly a lot of potential here. I would really like to see them try one more time with PlayStation All-Stars. Number 21, Fat Princess. Like I said, this generation just had a lot of strangely fun ideas, and Fat Princess really put that in the forefront. It's this goofy tower defense game where you protect the princess by making it harder for the other team to carry her away. It's a 16 versus 16 class-based game, and it was just a blast to play, and I think really it's a perfect example of the experimentation that we so often saw throughout this generation. Honestly, I would have really liked to have put this game higher on the list just because I do have a lot of great memories with Fat Princess, but because it is a multiplayer-focused game, it's not something that you can just simply relive to its fullest in today's world. Now, however, it does still have a single-player mode, so you can still play it that way if you truly want to. Number 20, Gran Turismo 5. I don't think you can make any PlayStation list without the mention of Gran Turismo. It's so often viewed as the king of racing games, and with each new PlayStation generation, you can expect a new installment to really showcase that jump in visual fidelity. And here came Gran Turismo 5 with the introduction of HD graphics. This really brought that realistic look to Gran Turismo, especially for those more premium cars. Now that was a little controversial at the time because not every car was premium, but it just had so much content with more than 1,000 cars and 72 tracks. So when you combine that with Gran Turismo simulation experience and their world-class physics, this is easily one of the best racing games from the PlayStation 3 era. 19. 3D Dot Heroes. Before there were HD 2D games, there was this little gem of a game published by Atlas over in the West and by FromSoft in the East. The PlayStation 3 exclusive that was unapologetically inspired by the classic Zelda formula. And while it never attracted a large audience, it still had a lot of heart. To this day, I think that this one holds up incredibly well thanks to its striking art style and timeless gameplay. And on top of that, it even has one of the best character creators that I've seen for any game. Really, it's just too bad that 3D Dot Heroes never got ported to anything else because I feel like it's a gem worth uncovering. Number 18, Puppeteer. Speaking of hidden gems, Puppeteer very well may be one of PlayStation's best internally developed hidden gems ever made. This was actually developed by the highly creative Sony Japan studio. Sadly, they got shut down a few years ago, but they really were an excellent studio, and you can see their full creativity on display here in Puppeteer. More or less, you play as a puppet who loses his head, but the catch is that he can find other heads to transform the way he plays. It's a fun, albeit kind of dark platformer that brings something completely new to the table. It's just a joy to play, and it also has a good sense of humor. If you do want to play Puppeteer, though, it is still locked away exclusively for the PlayStation 3. Number 17, Heavy Rain. During the PS3 era, we started to see more of these cinematic choose-your-own-adventure type of games, and Heavy Rain was at the height of that genre. Here came this crime thriller with a AAA budget created by Quantic Dreams and published by Sony. Now, sure, everybody remembers the infamous Sean meme, and not all of its ideas were perfectly executed, but it still offered a thrilling story and mystery that you yourself could impact with your own decisions. Even now, I would say that Heavy Rain is both one of the best within this genre and also just one of the most impactful. Number 16, Journey. Now, here's a game that's the perfect example of taking a simple concept and masterfully executing on that idea. Journey opens up by throwing you into this world with a distant mountain into the far-out land. There's little explanation, and you have no idea why you want to reach its peak. You just feel drawn to it. It's just all about the journey. But that's where it's special. There's this symbolic, emotional connection that ties into its mystery, and the entire game is designed around this one aspect. At the time of its launch, you could actually run into other live people who were also making the journey, and while you couldn't necessarily speak to them, you could reach out to them in other ways. A social element that's so much like the real world symbolizes all the people that comes and goes throughout our own everyday life. Simply put, Journey is more than just a game. It's art. It's an experience. 15. Ni no Kuni. The combination of Studio Ghibli and Level 5 created one of the most beautiful, timeless JRPGs that we've ever seen in Ni no Kuni. Now, this game has since been ported over to other platforms, but when it first launched exclusively for the PlayStation 3, its visual art style was quite frankly mind-blowing. It's really Studio Ghibli brought to gaming. But I also should say it's not just about the art. It also has a lot of heart, as you would expect from any Studio Ghibli film. They've always been masters for relatable, heart-wrenching tales. And that's exactly what this game is. It has an emotional, beautiful story about a young hero who travels to a parallel world. And it also is just fun to play. It draws a lot of comparisons to the Pokemon franchise, as it is a monster taming type of game, but I'd say that it's really its own thing, and it's still a timeless adventure that you could easily go back and enjoy. Number 14, Jak and Daxter Trilogy. During the PlayStation 3 era, collections were just all the rage. The PlayStation 3 had a number of collections that they brought over from the PlayStation 2 with HD visuals, including the Jak and Daxter Trilogy. Before Naughty Dog focused on hyper-realistic games, they were actually making very colorful platformers like Jak and Daxter. I mean, if you want to talk about one of the most iconic buddy duos ever made, Jak and Daxter is somewhere on that list for a very good reason. They're fun games, they combine action elements with platforming, and they have a creative world that really starts to come to life in the second game. They also have a rather interesting story as well, so if you like this genre, do yourself a favor and go back and play the Jak and Daxter Trilogy. Number 13, Sly Cooper 1 through 4. Speaking of collections, we need to talk about Sly Cooper. Now, unlike Jak and Daxter, sadly the Sly games never got modern ports, but thanks to their art style, these games still look incredible on the PlayStation 3, and you can actually play all 4 of the mainline titles. It has the Sly Collection remastered in HD, which is the first 3 games, and then Sly Cooper 4, which was built from the ground up for the PlayStation 3. Now, the 4th game might not be as well received as those first 3, but I'd say the entire series is still very special. It takes that traditional 3D platforming genre and it tries to do something different. They're ultimately lighthearted stealth games. I even go so far as to say these are some of the best games out there to introduce to young kids, but really, I think the entire family can really enjoy them because they are that much fun. Number 12, Resistance Trilogy. Now, during the PlayStation 3 era, Sony had a bit of a problem. They didn't have Halo. And this is all the more reason that I love competition. Competition breeds excellence. And this pushed Sony to be more creative and to try different genres. So they went out and they attempted to create their own sci-fi first-person shooter, which fans dubbed as Halo Killers. Now, Sony never really managed that feat, but they did, however, produce several high-quality shooters, including the Resistance series. I think it's rather safe to say that Insomniac knows how to make fun games, and, sure enough, the Resistance trilogy is no different. It has those creative weapons that you would expect from Insomniac. They also have interesting stories, and the Chimera are just some of the coolest alien threats that I've seen in any game. These games could simply be described as fun. And, it's too bad that we've yet to see these games revived for modern platforms. Number 11, Infamous 1 and 2. After completing the Sly Cooper games, Sucker Punch moved on to a brand new IP, Infamous, and you know what? Once again, their talent was on full display. It's almost kind of funny looking back on it because, this was at a time before big budget superhero games were all the rage. But Sucker Punch, they didn't need a licensed franchise to create one of the best superhero games ever made. The concept on paper for Infamous is rather simple. You play as somebody who suddenly has superpowers, and it gives the player the choice to use these powers for good or evil. It was fun, it was relatable, and it had fantastic open worlds to explore. Both Infamous 1 and 2 to me still stands among some of the best superhero games ever made. Number 10, Little Big Planet. If you haven't noticed, creativity has kind of been a theme throughout this list, and Little Big Planet is a prime example of that mentality. All of these years later, I still remember them showcasing this new, charming 2D platformer on stage. And it just brought so much charm with this humorous narration combined with, in my opinion, one of the best designed mascots ever made. I mean, how can you not like Sackboy? He's absolutely adorable. But where Little Big Planet really separates itself compared to other games is that it puts that creativity in the player's hands. They pushed a completely new genre forward, the play, create, share genre, and that was always at the forefront of their games. They always encouraged players to use their own imagination to create and share worlds online, and they did that in a way that made the single-player campaigns feel really unique and special. These are just timeless games, and they're just some of the most memorable platformers that I think that I've ever played. Now, I will say that I think Little Big Planet 2 is the best in the series, but the first one is really good as well, and truth be told, even though this video is not about the PlayStation Vita, don't sleep on Little Big Planet Vita either. Number 9, Mon Nation Racers. Now, speaking of play, create, share, well, Mon Nation Racers took the idea and applied it to kart racing. This was Sony's very own first-party kart racer, and it was such a good game. Now, for comparison's sake, it plays a lot more like Diddy Kong Racing than it does something like Mario Kart. The battle items are upgradable with defensive and offensive weapons, but you could really create any character that you wanted to. I actually used to race around as Old Snake from Metal Gear Solid, but if you wanted to race as somebody like, let's say, Mario, Sackboy, Kratos, or even Master Chief from Halo, they were all there because the tools allowed players to create and share them online. You could also create your own track to race on, and this was probably the easiest creative tool that I've seen in any game like this. It was super simple, and you could really just create a track in mere seconds if that's what you wanted to do. Now, that would all mean nothing, though, if it wasn't for its tight controls. It feels great to play, and in my opinion, Mon Nation Racers is quietly one of the better kart racing games ever made. It's once again just too bad that Sony didn't try to grow this series with more installments, because I think there's just so much potential here. Number 8, Ratchet & Clank. Now, while we're talking about mascots, we might as well go ahead and talk about one of PlayStation's longest-running franchises, Ratchet & Clank. Ratchet & Clank was created at the height of buddy duos for the PlayStation 2, but if you're a Ratchet & Clank fan, really the PlayStation 3 is the place that you need to be. Not only does it have the Ratchet & Clank collection in HD, which includes the original trilogy, but they also released the future trilogy throughout the PlayStation 3 generation. This includes Tools of Destruction, A Crack in Time, which is my own personal favorite, and then there was also Into the Nexus, one of PlayStation 3's swan songs. Now, there's also various smaller spin-offs for the PlayStation 3 that weren't really quite as good, but for this list, I really just want to talk about how good A Crack in Time is. I feel like this is still the best from the Ratchet & Clank series. It has an enjoyable story, it's humorous, it's creative, and the puzzle specifically, I think, is just the best the series has to offer. I mean, I'd really recommend playing through all 6 games on the PlayStation 3, but A Crack in Time, I think it's just on its own level of greatness. Number 7, God of War Collection. Before there was Dad of War, there was God of War, this brutal game about the revenge of a godslayer, a trilogy that defined the hack and slash genre to its highest degree. There's not many games out there that feels as good to play as God of War, and a big part of that really is its iconic weapon. The Blades of Chaos legitimately might be one of the most fun weapons ever created in any video game, as you just tear through Greek mythology and slay gods who once betrayed and tricked Kratos. Now, there's also plenty of other weapons in God of War that's a lot of fun, and something about these games is that they were also visually very impressive. I think that especially shows up in God of War 3, which was created exclusively for the PlayStation 3. This is one of the best looking games from that generation, and I still think this game looks excellent even all these years later. The set pieces were just amazing in God of War 3. And the original trilogy, yes, it might be different than Dad of War, which puts more emphasis on an empathetic story, but in terms of just pure gameplay, that original trilogy really defines what makes this genre so fun. Number 6, Ico and the Shadow of the Colossus Collection. Now, okay, so Shadow of Colossus may have a modern remake on the PlayStation 4, but both it and Ico, which never got ported over, remains as some of Sony's most memorable games. It's kind of difficult to explain how these games make you feel because that's a big part as to why they're so special. They're kind of quiet, mysterious, and somber, and it's something that really grabs your attention right away. It almost makes you feel compelled to push forward, and then suddenly you grow this real, genuine attachment to its characters and world. And that's all done without a bunch of dialogue. It's done through their body language and how they react to the world around them. I truly can't think of another game that strikes the same emotions that both of these games do. Now, even though both of these games are connected, they do, however, play very different from one another. Ico has you play as a young boy who finds himself in a dangerous castle, where him and this little girl works together to try and escape. Then, as for Shadow of Colossus, you basically hunt down giant creatures, and as you uncover why, it's just such a heart-wrenching tale. These are, in my opinion, must-play games. They're just such an experience to have. Number 5, Killzone Trilogy. Now, here we are in the final 5, and I had to go with the Killzone Trilogy here. Killzone, I'd say, is really remembered for 2 different things. One is the misleading marketing, but then number 2 is kind of its redemption arc when you actually play the game. Killzone 2 really brought those state-of-the-art visuals to life, and I still think it looks great all of these years later, which is kind of a testament to its art style and just overall graphics. This was at a time when Halo and Call of Duty kind of controlled that first-person shooter space, but Killzone for the PlayStation 3 was really a good series in its own right. The aim mechanics I'd kind of describe as being heavier, but that's a part of what I think made it stand out compared to the competition. It just felt different. And whether you played its single-player campaign or its multiplayer, it was just a blast to play with some really creative perks and weapons. Now, I will say that if you play the trilogy, Killzone 1, which got an HD port for the PlayStation 3, isn't nearly as good as Killzone 2 and 3. There was a big step up in quality. It's kind of crazy to think, though, that this was actually the last first-person shooter franchise that Sony internally developed. I think we need to change that and bring back the Killzone series. Number 4, The Last of Us. Naughty Dog was at the top of their game during the PlayStation 3 era. This was peak Naughty Dog, and to end the generation, they went off in a bang. The Last of Us was the PlayStation 3 swan song, and you want to talk about a special generation, what a game this ended off with. It's still one of the best single-player experiences ever made thanks to its excellent writing, the characters, and also its world. I mean, up to this point, we had gotten a lot of zombie games. That was kind of a trend. But here came The Last of Us, and they put a creative new spin on this genre. A real-life fungus by the name of cordyceps, which targets insects, can now infect humans. It's kind of creepy to think about, but in terms of a zombie experience, The Last of Us stands tall for its memorable story, well-crafted animations, and brutal gameplay. Now, of course, The Last of Us has since been ported over to modern platforms with a remake/remaster, but it all started here on the PlayStation 3. Number 3, Demon's Souls. I mean, we've kind of gotten used to the Souls genre by this point, but here's where it all started. Demon's Souls kicked off the Soulsborne games, and gaming really has never been the same since. This is one of the most inspirational games ever made, which is kind of interesting in the aspect that it was a slow recognition. Demon's Souls is not From Software's most popular game, and it really wasn't until Dark Souls when more people started to notice it. But I've always had a soft spot for Demon's Souls. I still remember when I was in high school and it first released in Japan in 2009, and because it wasn't available here in the West, I wanted to import it from Japan despite me not knowing Japanese language. Now, thankfully, I waited because it eventually got ported over to the West later that year, and then really the rest is just kind of history. I was absorbed into its dark, grim world, and I loved the challenge that it had to offer. Now, of course, they've since remade Demon's Souls for the PlayStation 5. I'd highly recommend it, but again, it all started here on the PlayStation 3. Number 2, Metal Gear Solid 4. Now, if there's one game that's just frustratingly stuck on the PlayStation 3, that has to be Metal Gear Solid 4. I know for a lot of people, Metal Gear Solid 3 is the fan favorite in the series, but for me personally, it's Metal Gear Solid 4. Its story and send-off for Snake is just so heart-wrenching. I was captivated by its story just from the get-go, and good thing because this game is infamous for some of the longest cutscenes in any game ever made. So, I mean, you have to carve some time out before you play it, but truth be told, it's also just an excellent game. The stealth espionage that Hideo Kojima is so well known for is on full display, and the attention to detail is still really impressive even by today's standard. It's kind of the small things that stands out, but that's the type of experience you will have in Metal Gear Solid 4. It's just masterfully crafted with every fine detail on full display. This is one of Hideo Kojima's best. And at the number 1 spot, I have Haze. Nah, I'm just joking. Of course, it's the Uncharted trilogy, which in a lot of ways created the modern PlayStation blueprint. I mean, if you look at any of their other modern games with that cinematic story focus, well, it all started here with the Uncharted trilogy on the PlayStation 3 and the success that they had. Interestingly, though, for me, Uncharted still stands tall as my favorite PlayStation games ever made, and really they're just some of my all-time favorite games, period. They're easily in my top 3, and that's because it combines minute-to-minute thrilling gameplay, amazing characters, and some of the most memorable stories ever made, period. It's truly just a special franchise, and just everything about them are so memorable. I really just cannot express enough how much I love the characters and gameplay in these games. It's one series that I can go back to on a yearly basis and play them. I've now platinumed these games multiple times because that's how I feel about them. They really are that good. The set pieces, the platforming, the puzzles, the treasure hunts, and the constant humor from Nathan Drake and his friends. I mean, these games are true masterpieces that are cemented into gaming history. They truly, truly are some of the best games ever made. Now, I will say, though, that there is a big jump in terms of quality from Uncharted 1 to Uncharted 2. Now, I still do think that first game is really good, but it was Uncharted 2 when it really started to hit its stride. And from that moment, PlayStation just became something entirely different. With the help of games like Uncharted, PlayStation became synonymous with quality among fans. From that point forward, when fans saw that PlayStation logo, since then there really has been that expectation for high quality that you can't get anywhere else. And I think games like Uncharted for the PlayStation 3 was that pivotal moment. Again, this here is why I think the PlayStation 3 generation stands out so much. It might not necessarily be Sony's most successful console, but I think that competition pushed them to be their best. So, they buckled down, they got creative, and they pushed out quality game after quality game. And this here is what cemented them as a first-party powerhouse. And that belief still lives on to this day. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this list. I hope you enjoyed the video, but let me hear about your favorite PlayStation 3 games in the comments below. Do subscribe, though, because I do plan on exploring other retro platforms in the near future. So, until next time, peace out.